Welcome, my dear seekers of the sinister. You've chosen the perfect night to wander into my domain, this hallowed ground, where whispers of the dead dance on the wind and shadows hold secrets untold. I am Dr. Sinister, your host, your guide, and your harbinger of horrors yet to come. Tonight we delve into the depths of the graveyard, where the veil between the living and the dead grows thin. Be warned, once you step into this world of shadows and dread, there's no turning back. So light a candle, cling to your courage, and prepare for an unholy trilogy that will leave your heart pounding and your soul trembling. After all, the graveyard always welcomes new guests. The moon hung low and heavy, its pale light casting long and shifting shadows across the iron gates of St. Lament's Cemetery, a place so steeped in silence that even the wind dared not speak. It was there, amidst the stillness and decay, that Ezekiel Granger, a man of frayed nerves and dwindling fortune, began his tenure as a graveyard keeper. The job was meant to be a simple one: guard the grounds through the dead of night, report any trespassers, and ensure the sanctity of the resting dead. Yet, as the first chill of midnight settled over his lonely watch, Ezekiel would come to realize his charge was anything but ordinary. The bell of St. Lament's Chapel tolled midnight, a hollow sound that seemed to awaken not just the hour, but the air itself. Ezekiel, seated in the caretaker's shack, with a dim lantern at his side, shivered as a creeping unease slithered into his bones. His gaze darted to the window, where the shadows of leaning tombstones appeared to shift unnaturally in the flickering lamplight. Surely it was nothing more than the trickery of his weary mind, so he assured himself. Yet the unease remained. He rose, taking his lantern and coat, and stepped into the chill of the night. The ground crunched beneath his boots, each step a hollow echo in the suffocating silence. He inspected the cemetery as instructed, the rows of tombstones standing as mute sentinels to those who had long departed this world. The names etched upon their surfaces bore stories he would never know, but tonight he felt as though their stories were being whispered all around him, just out of reach, just beyond the veil of reason. As he turned a corner near the oldest section of the graveyard, Ezekiel saw something that froze the blood in his veins. A figure cloaked in shadows, standing motionless by a grave adorned with a crumbling angel. The lantern's light faltered, flickering as though it too were afraid. "Who goes there?" Ezekiel called, his voice trembling in the frost-laden air. The figure did not move, but the shadows around it seemed to deepen, to writhe, as though alive. Cautiously, Ezekiel approached, each step feeling as though it carried him closer to some unspoken doom. When he was but a few feet away, the figure turned. Its face, or what should have been a face, was an abyss, a void darker than the grave itself. A voice emanated from the emptiness, low and resonant, like the toll of a bell heard from beneath the earth. "You are the Watcher," it said, "and yet you see nothing." Ezekiel staggered back, the lantern slipping from his hand and shattering upon the ground. The light extinguished, plunging him into darkness, save for the moon's mournful glow. The figure loomed closer, and Ezekiel could feel the weight of its presence, as though the air itself were pressing down upon him. What are you?" Ezekiel stammered. "I am the debt," it replied, "the toll exacted for years of unrest. The dead you guard demand their due, and you, their keeper, shall pay it." With those words, the shadows surged forward, consuming Ezekiel's vision and filling his ears with a cacophony of voices, pleading, wailing, accusing. He fell to his knees, clutching his head as the voices tore through his mind like shards of broken glass. He saw flashes of the cemetery's history, graves disturbed, bodies stolen, and secrets buried deeper than any coffin. "You bear their guilt," the shadow intoned. "You shall bear their torment." When dawn broke over St. Clement's cemetery, the groundskeeper who came to relieve Ezekiel found only his coat and shattered lantern lying by the crumbling angel. Of Ezekiel himself, there was no sign, save for faint whispers that seemed to linger in the air whenever one walked by his post. To this day, some claim that if you wander St. Clement's cemetery on a moonlit night, you might see a shadowed figure standing vigil by the crumbling angel. And if you listen closely, you might hear the mournful cries of Ezekiel Granger, the man who worked the graveyard shift and paid its ultimate toll. Beneath a starless sky, the winds howled through Black Hollow Cemetery, a desolate patch of ground nestled on the outskirts of town, long abandoned to weeds and whispers. The young, brash souls of Caleb, Jonah, and Marcy found themselves there that night, armed with spray cans and bottles of cheap beer, their heads filled with bravado and mischief. The cemetery had become a local legend of sorts. Its crumbling tombstones and decayed mausoleums whispered to house restless spirits. Yet, as with all tales of the dead, the three scoffed and dared one another to prove their courage. "What's there to be afraid of?" Caleb said, the self-proclaimed leader, as he leaned against a lichen-covered tombstone. "They're dead. What can they do?" Jonah laughed nervously, though his eyes darted at every rustling branch and shifting shadow. Marcy, ever bold, took a long swig from her bottle and grinned. "If the stories are true, let's wake 'em up. Give this place a little makeover." She pulled a can of red spray paint from her bag and began shaking it, the rattle echoing like a bone-chilling rattle of chains. The others laughed, egging her on, and soon all three were vandalizing the sacred stones, their laughter ringing through the night like a taunt to the sleeping dead. Marcy painted leering faces and crude symbols on an angelic statue. Caleb scrawled his name in bold letters across an ancient family crypt. Jonah, emboldened by the others, tipped over a weathered cross that marked a child's grave, the crack of the stone hitting the ground, echoing like a thunderclap. It was then the wind fell silent, and the air grew unnaturally cold. The laughter faltered as the trio looked at one another, their breath visible in the frigid stillness. Jonah was the first to speak, his voice trembling. "Did you guys feel that? Like something's watching us?" Marcy rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the shiver that crept down her spine. "Don't tell me you're scared of some old ghost stories." But before Caleb could chime in, the ground beneath them shuddered. A low groan seemed to rise from the earth itself, like the sound of stone grinding against stone. The desecrated graves they had mocked and defiled began to shift, the earth parting as skeletal hands clawed their way to the surface. "Oh God," Jonah whispered, dropping his can of paint. The dead rose, not in the shambling, lifeless manner of popular tales, but with an eerie, unnatural grace. Their hollow eyes burned with a pale, sickly light, their bones clacking with each measured step. They encircled the trio, their decayed forms a silent condemnation. Caleb, ever the leader, tried to run, but the skeletal hand of a long-dead soldier shot out, grasping his ankle with an iron grip. He fell to the ground with a scream, his struggles futile as the dead dragged him toward the open maw of his desecrated crypt. Marcy and Jonah could only watch in horror as Caleb's screams faded, swallowed by the darkness. Marcy turned to Jonah, her bravado now shattered. "We have to get out of here," she cried, grabbing his arm. But Jonah stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the toppled cross. The small grave it had marked now gaped open, and from its depths rose the spectral figure of a child, its eyes empty voids, its mouth stretched into a soundless scream. The child raised a bony hand, and Jonah fell to his knees, clutching his throat as though unseen hands were choking the life from him. Within moments, he collapsed, lifeless, beside the grave he had disturbed. Marcy ran, her heart pounding, her breath ragged. She stumbled through the maze of tombstones, the shadows seeming to stretch and reach for her. She could still hear Caleb's screams, Jonah's strangled gasps, and the awful silence of the dead in pursuit. She reached the cemetery gate, her hand grasping the cold iron, when she felt it, a hand on her shoulder, its touch icy as death itself. She turned, and there stood the angelic statue she had defaced. Only now its painted face was gone, replaced by an expression of wrath. Its stone wings spread wide, and its outstretched hand plunged into her chest, pulling forth the last of her breath. When the townsfolk found the cemetery the next morning, they discovered no sign of the trio, only their cans of spray paint scattered among the tombstones. The angel statue had been restored, its face serene once more, though a faint trace of red lingered on its fingers, like dried blood. Some say the spirits of Black Hollow Cemetery still watch over their resting place, punishing any who dare to disturb their peace. And if you listen closely at night, you might hear the echoes of Caleb, Jonah, and Marcy, their laughter replaced by screams, warning others of the price of desecration. The legend of Marguerite Lenoir, the so-called Whispering Witch, had been passed down for generations in the small town of Ashbourne. They said she was buried in Silent Vale Cemetery, her grave marked by a single blackened stone, etched with words too worn to decipher. It was said that anyone who lingered too long at her resting place could hear her whispers, enticing them to dig, to unearth the secrets she had taken to the grave. Evelyn Royce, a celebrated paranormal investigator, dismissed such tales as provincial nonsense. For years, she had built a career debunking folklore, exposing haunted places as mere tricks of light and sound. Silent Vale was to be her crowning achievement. Armed with state-of-the-art equipment and accompanied by her two cameramen, Victor and Elliot, she planned to live-stream a séance from Marguerite's grave. It would be proof that even the darkest legends were no match for science and reason. The three arrived at the cemetery just before midnight, the air heavy with the damp chill of November. The graveyard stretched out before them like a forgotten labyrinth, its tombstones cracked and leaning, half consumed by creeping vines. Evelyn led the way, her flashlight casting long shadows across the uneven ground. "There it is," Victor said, his voice hushed as they approached the infamous grave. The blackened stone stood out against the pale gray of the surrounding markers, its surface jagged as though scorched by fire. Elliot set up the cameras and microphones, their red recording lights glowing like watchful eyes. Evelyn knelt by the grave, her hands brushing away the moss and dirt, obscuring the inscription. The faint outline of a name, Marguerite Lenoir, emerged, along with a cryptic phrase, "In silence eternal, her truth lies buried." Evelyn began the seance, her voice calm and commanding as she called out to the supposed spirit. "Marguerite Lenoir, if you are here, reveal yourself to us. We seek only to understand your story." For a moment, there was nothing but the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Then faintly, the whispers began. At first they were indistinct, like wind threading through the trees. But as the minutes passed, they grew louder, clearer. A woman's voice, low and melodic, seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath them. "Why do you call to me when you cannot bear the answers?" Evelyn froze, the skepticism on her face faltering. She glanced at Victor and Elliot, who stared wide-eyed at their monitors. The sound was real, captured by their equipment. "Do you hear that?" Elliot whispered. Evelyn nodded, her voice trembling slightly. "Marguerite, we wish to uncover the truth. What lies buried here?" The whispers grew insistent, the words overlapping, each more urgent than the last. "Dig, dig deep. Free me, and the truth shall be yours." Evelyn hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. But the whispers grew louder, more demanding, drowning out the logical voice in her mind. Against her better judgment, she seized a small shovel from her bag and began to dig. Victor and Elliot exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing, the eerie atmosphere rooting them to their spots. The whispers seemed to swell with every spadeful of dirt Evelyn removed, their tone shifting from pleading to triumphant. After several minutes, the shovel struck something solid. Evelyn dropped to her knees, brushing away the dirt with trembling hands. Beneath the soil lay a weathered wooden box, its surface blackened like the grave marker. "Open it," Victor said, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn hesitated, but the whispers urged her on, their tone now almost jubilant. With shaking hands, she pried open the lid. Inside lay an object wrapped in tattered black cloth. She unwrapped it, revealing a grotesque relic, a withered, mummified heart, its surface etched with strange symbols. The moment it was exposed, the whispers stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Elliot stepped closer, his camera trained on the relic. "What is that thing?" Before Evelyn could answer, the ground beneath them trembled. The air grew heavy, and a deep guttural voice boomed from the grave. "You have freed me." A shadow burst forth from the grave, an amorphous form that blotted out the pale moonlight. It wrapped around Evelyn, Victor, and Elliot, their screams echoing through the cemetery. The cameras toppled, capturing only flashes of writhing darkness and the sound of splintering bones. When the townsfolk found the grave the next morning, all that remained were the toppled cameras, their footage corrupted save for a single, haunting image. Evelyn's face frozen in terror, the shadow behind her stretching into an open maw. The grave of Marguerite Lenoir remained, her blackened stone untouched, but now with a new inscription etched into its surface. 3 more have joined the silence eternal. To this day, no one ventures near Silent Vale Cemetery after dark. Some claim they still hear the whispers, beckoning the foolish and the curious to dig and meet the fate that awaits beneath the earth.